This is The World This Week. We're in the company of Pierre Haski, a French news website, Rue 89, radio and news freelance Paris correspondent Catherine Field, Cynthia Cardoso of sister station Radio France International, and France 24's very own Douglas Herbert. The world's worst ever outbreak of Ebola has been steadily building pace since April. Now, though, as the front page headline says in Wednesday's Dallas Morning News, Ebola has come to America. Hospitals, schools, and offices on alert after the first homegrown case on U.S. soil, a man who'd returned from Liberia on September the 20th. That's prompted all sorts of alerts and health bulletins that have been coming out. Douglas Herbert, what's been your reaction to the way this story's?
Look, ever since we first heard about this outbreak, everyone in Europe's been saying, is it going to come here? Is it? And then, in the U.S., is it going to go there? And, the U.S. is always in this perfect situation of always primed to be panicked. Americans are very good at being panicked about any number of issues. And Ebola, it doesn't take a lot to panic you about Ebola. And for all it's been in the news, for all it's been in the headlines and the education about it and the talking about it, there's still a lot of misunderstanding about how it's spread. Your natural inclination is to think, I'm sitting here on the set with you, you have Ebola, I'm gonna be infected. And it's not spread through the air, and they're trying to educate people about that. But, it's more psychological. You could explain to people, medically, clinically, you're not going to get it by A, B, and C. But people aren't really going to understand that. And already in Dallas, you have officials basically, keeping people almost under house alert. There are 100 people which potentially could have come into contact with this infected person. So you already see the beginnings of this sense of, you think of the Hollywood movies, and obviously we're not there yet, outbreak, epidemic, with the men coming in the chem suits.
There was a Hollywood movie with Dustin Hoffman.
With Dustin Hoffman, exactly. They clear out the, and, you can almost see that scenario. We're not that far from it.
Cynthia Cardoso?
Yes, really. I was reading a very interesting piece at New York Times where they presented how you cannot get Ebola. If someone coughs next to you on the subway, maybe, but they're trying to explain because, of course, in the United States, you see this kind of germophobia and paranoia regarding diseases and outbreaks. So I think, of course, there is one case, and, of course, Dallas is not Liberia. But so far, I think the impression of the public opinion in the United States that, of course, they have this fear. And when you see the press, they make perhaps too much on this case. Of course, it's a serious disease, of course, and of course it's a legitimate concern to be concerned about the disease, but I think they should not exaggerate, because spreading fear, it's almost more hurtful than, of course, useful.
But I thought it was extraordinary that the healthcare professionals in America sent this guy home. It's fairly simple, sort of, where have you been? I've been to Liberia. Oh, dear, over this way, sir, we have a ward just for you. No, there's, took his temperature, started, nothing, off you go home. Why weren't healthcare professionals told, as most GPs in France and Britain have been told, if you have someone from West Africa coming in with these symptoms, move them along to the special ward, even if there's a chance they haven't got Ebola, send them to the specialists.
All right. Contrast the flurry that we've seen there in America with the headline in Britain's The Independent this Friday that featured an Associated Press picture of a bereaved daughter of an Ebola victim in the Liberian capital, Monrovia, Liberia, where on Thursday the president said the disease had now spread to all 23 of the nation's counties. Pierre Haski, we're starting to see the international community lurch into action.
Yes, it's been pretty slow, and for months I was always surprised to hear that only Médecins Sans Frontières, Doctors Without Borders, was there. There was no UN hospital or any other country, and only an NGO was in the field and in all the reports you would see. And that's been very strange, because everybody knows that an epidemic doesn't know any borders, and that it's I lived through an epidemic when I was based in Beijing. It was a SARS epidemic in 2003, which is far less lethal than Ebola, obviously. But it's amazing to be in a city of 15, 17 million people at that time that is stopped by an epidemic, and that's where an authoritarian regime steps in,
Well,
where it can stop a country.
Let me get your reaction then to this viewer, Allison, on Facebook, telling us the only way to stop the spread of Ebola, unfortunately, is to seal off the stricken areas. Do you agree?
Unfortunately, that's you have to cut the ways of transmission, and that's what the Chinese did in a most undemocratic way. But that's been efficient to stop the spread in about 3 weeks, once they had stopped hiding the reality of the disease, obviously. But Beijing was cut in districts. You could not move from one to the other. People who were in a building that was infected could not move out, and you had guards everywhere, and that's what's probably missing, the kind of organization. I'm not saying that you should kill people and impose dictatorship, but at least have structures that can handle that. And probably Liberia or Guinea didn't have that initially. They are trying to catch up on these structures, and that's where the Western type of organization is pretty good on medical coverage, but less good as controlling people, and that's where you have this man sent home when he should not have been.
And one of the problems in the region itself is, in some instances where you have sent in medical workers, aid workers, there's a lot of stigma attached to them, where a lot of people perceive them as the ones bringing in the virus, contaminating them. They're not seen as people coming to help them, but rather perhaps coming to harm them. So there's still that, and that obviously gets back to the education. So it's not as simple as, just, the Western aid workers weren't there, they weren't present, it wasn't organized, because those who have gone in have often been the target of real, they've been beaten up in some cases. I think a few were actually killed in Guinea.
And also the good news in all this bad news is that Nigeria, which is a country that could have a lot of chaos if needed, has been able to contain the spread of Ebola. They've had a few cases, and now it's said to be under control.
And pharmaceutical companies fast-tracking now the work on a vaccine. Of course, some complaining that it's been around since 1976, and they're getting around to it now. But anyway, that's another debate. Let's turn our attention to Cynthia Cardoso's native Brazil. This coming Sunday, voters go to the polls in the first round of the presidential election. Incumbent Dilma Rousseff seemed in trouble lately, with latecomer Marina Silva taking the campaign by storm, the charismatic Green Party leader taking the top of the ticket when socialist partner Eduardo Campos died in an August plane crash. Now, though, Silva seems to be fading. What's going on?
Well, I don't like cliches, but of course it seems a little bit like a soap opera. Of course, first she got stride climbing the polls after the tragic death of her running mate Eduardo Campos, and of course she has all this story behind her. She comes from a very humble background. She was rubber tapper. She comes from extreme poverty. Of course, all this. And, of course, besides the death of Eduardo Campos, it was a major for her to boost her campaign. But now, over the last 5 weeks, she's coming back and forth on many subjects. So, for instance, she starts supporting gay marriage, and then she makes a step back. Then she starts supporting more proactive environmental policy, and then she steps back. So this back and forth, just hesitations on her campaign is hurting them, hurting Marina and his running mate. And also, we've been seeing a very aggressive campaign against Marina by Dilma Rousseff, the incumbent president, and also by Aécio Neves, the center-right. So they kind of rally against Marina, and is kind of course, showing to fade away not the charisma, but the campaign in these last days.
And so there's the chance that there could be a first-round knockout?
Well, it's perhaps a bit too close to call it. First round knockout, I think it's going to be more difficult to have Dilma assuring for 50% of the vote. I think it's more difficult, although some polls show that she's around 47%. But I think for the second running mate in this the second round, Marina or Aécio is a bit today is too close to call. It was not 2 weeks ago, but today it's a bit different scenario.
And the stock market going like this on.
Yeah, actually, it's whenever we have a kind kind of, before elections in Brazil, we have this kind of syndrome of panic in the markets. I mean, in 2002, it was already the case. Before the election of Lula, we saw the stock markets going up, the Brazil risk going up, climbing, all stock markets going down, actually, sorry. But then, in 2002, they were afraid of what Lula could bring to Brazil. He was a leftist, he was they predict that he would impose socialism in Brazil, so there was a kind of irrational fear. And now, actually, it's not the fear of left-wing policy. They fear that the economy is going to be stagnated, and that's why that's why the markets are against Dilma. They even have a slogan: "Is anything but Dilma."
So their fear was that Lula would do too much, and
now that she's doing.
Now the fear is that she'll do too little.
Yeah, but the economy is not. Of course, the economy has some problems. We have inflation. They have slow economic growth, but it's not all bad. I mean, she succeeded also to reduce poverty and extreme poverty. So we have some good signs, but of course, not enough to calm the market.
One question on this, Pierre Haski. When you see the descriptions of Dilma Rousseff, the incumbent. And she's described as a guerrilla fighter turned technocrat. What's your reaction to that?
Well, there was a picture a few years ago that emerged of her after being interrogated under the military dictatorship, and she looked like really someone who was, a fighter who had been undergoing a lot of stress and tension. And today you see someone who is in charge of a major government. So she's done this transformation. But she's also, she's still a fighter because, look, a few months ago, we were all predicting her downfall because she had the middle-class demonstrations. Exactly. Then Brazil lost the World Cup, which everybody said, oh, it's going to be very bad for her re-election.
That up.
and all of a sudden, she's now leading the polls again and in a position to win, which is seeing from far away an incredible recovery.
Somehow she always succeeds to bounce back. It's for this past 2 weeks. Everybody thought that she may lose, but now she's going back.
All right, someone else who's hoping for a comeback of sorts, or at least a decisive win come next spring, is David Cameron. And this week, he's been making some pretty strong statements about Europe. He said he'd have been 1,000 times more heartbroken if the Scots had left the UK than if Britain votes out of Europe. Cameron reiterating his pledge of a 2017 referendum ahead of the Conservatives' last party conference before that general election. Turns out that that was only the opening salvo. Cameron in Birmingham telling the delegates that he'll call on Britain to quit the European Court of Human Rights. He'll also call for renegotiation of EU rules on migration and immigration.
Britain, I know you want this sorted, so I will go to Brussels. I will not take no for an answer, and when it comes to free movement, I will get what Britain needs.
Douglas Herbert, will he get what Britain needs?
Well, I just want to say, he's throwing everything in the kitchen sink at the Tories in order to. It's self-interest and to stay in power, but it's amazing how much he has promised. And I think that he has backed himself into such a corner. It's hard to see how he can now sort of, even if he were inclined, which I don't think he but even if he were inclined to do an about-face, change his mind, perhaps pull back from some of these positions, he really can't right now. We saw it in the Scottish referendum, all of a sudden promising all this, the greater devolution. You can now ask yourself, would the no have possibly still won, possibly by a pretty sizable margin, even if he hadn't promised all that broader autonomy for Scotland? Then coming back and saying to the English, it's now time for the English to have their say, perhaps a little mini English parliament within Westminster, and now promising this in-and-out referendum in 1917 He's made so many promises. He's nailed to the wall, literally, to the pillory there.
All right. Regarding leaving Europe, one comment, not a done deal, but could happen if EU continues to bail out failing member economies like Spain and Greece. If that referendum does happen in 2017, you got to wonder, Catherine Field.
Well, I go a little bit further than Doug here. I think, unlike backing himself into a corner, I think he's backing himself into a chainsaw. I mean, this is really, this has always been the Conservatives' weak spot, has been Europe. And now they really are showing it that, they're blaming everything on Europe. They're throwing the kitchen sink to be able to, win the hearts of all the possible Tory voters. They really are at the behest of UKIP now. They're really very scared.
Yeah, concentrating the minds is UKIP, the Eurosceptic party. They picked off another MP from the Conservatives.
There's a bad week for David Cameron as well as this party conference. He had the second defection by an MP. One of the party donors, the big party donors, has shifted his money from the Conservatives to UKIP. It's not a good time. And I think what's going to happen is David Cameron is already in that sort of column of British prime ministers who aren't the sharpest knives in the drawer. I think he's going to go down in history if he gets through to the next, the next elections.
And the Conservatives are ahead in the polls.
Yeah. Well, it could well be. And he just doesn't seem to have what it takes to be a good prime minister, thinking smart, reacting all the time, giving away the kitchen sink to the Scots, waking up the English, waking up the regions in England, and now going to Europe, where so much of Britain's prosperity is based around having free trade within Europe, and now talking about moving out of that.
How's it going to go down in Brussels? I will get what Britain needs.
He'll get nowhere. And when he says that he wouldn't cry if the UK decided to leave Europe, there are many people in Europe who feel the same the other way, that they wouldn't cry if the UK left Europe, which I think both are wrong. I mean, I think it's a bad idea for UK and it's a bad idea for Europe. But the weird thing in his policy choice is that he's running after UKIP, after this independence party, which is running the anti-European show. And it reminds me of Nicolas Sarkozy running after Marine Le Pen by buying all her campaign slogans. And in the end, he ended up with defeat and dishonor, to use a historical phrase. And I think that's what today is the risk for Cameron too.
And the UKIP policies seem remarkably similar to those of the National Front.
It's always the easiest solution somehow to blame Europe for the problems and try to deviate attention as well.
No, I mean, the Euroscepticism, the UKIP is as dangerous. I mean, maybe we don't talk about it as much.
And there will be UKIP members in the next parliament?
I'll stay on the fence on that one. But I mean, it seems that the national force, perhaps the national front right now in France is perhaps riding a little bit more of a crest right now than UKIP. But UKIP is definitely in the ascendant, and David Cameron is cognizant of that. And like we said, he's pandering to that very basest electoral constituency.
All right. Now, the next general election in Britain is in 2017. In 2015, sorry. In France, next presidential election is not till 2017. But gosh, it feels like there's campaign fever in this country. Conservative Nicolas Sarkozy's recent return to politics, triggering, by the way, a rift both within his UMP party and within the couple of his predecessor, Jacques Chirac. Chirac's wife, Bernadette, has endorsed Sarkozy, but Jacques having none of it. He's come out in favor of former Premier and Foreign Minister Alain Juppé with a public statement published in daily newspaper Le Figaro in favor of Juppé against Sarkozy. I've always known Alain Juppé would meet his destiny and that of France. Few things could make me happier for myself, for him, and above all, for our country. The irony of it all, Cynthia, a former presidential couple there split on which conservative to back.
Yeah, but somehow I think there was never really a love story between Sarkozy and Chirac. It was always very controversial. So I think it's not very surprising that now Chirac comes to support Alain Juppé. But also this return of Sarkozy. I mean, he has never left, right? So he come back, but he never really left the French arena in politics. So
Chirac supported Hollande. I mean, there's a pattern here. I think we can identify it. The pattern is not Sarkozy.
Exactly.
Doesn't matter who it is.
There's one key to understand this is that when Chirac was the mayor of Paris, there was a major scandal, and Alain Juppé was the #2 in the mayor's office, and he paid for Chirac. He protected his boss by taking the blame, and he was excluded from politics for 1.5 years. He was and he was sentenced in prison. He suffered indignity to protect his boss, and today Chirac is really keeping a kind of emotional link to Juppé, whom he once called the best among ourselves. And certainly there's no love lost with Sarkozy.
Final question on this, I'll put it to Catherine Field. How will the voters react?
I feel really sorry for the voters, actually. They really are. They're poor things, you know. I think at the end of the day, the voters aren't silly. The voters know that Sarkozy was in power for 5 years. He didn't do anything much. And judging by the polls, Juppé seems to have tapped a bit of a nerve. He does have a lot of support, and he could actually give Hollande a bit of a run for his money.
But it is early days. Remember that election, not until the spring of 2017. Catherine Field, I want to thank Douglas Herbert, Pierre Haski, and Cynthia Cardoso. Before we say goodbye, though, let's say hello to James Creedon.
Evening, Francois. Look, we're looking at the Chirac versus Chirac. Could you call it a scandal? I'm not really sure, but it's playing out in the media in any case. Just to recap, Jacques Chirac supported Alain Juppé, or it became official that he did. Then his lovely wife went on French radio. Did we already hear the quotes?
Yes, we heard the quotes.
Okay, so, she doesn't like Alain Juppé, I think it's fair to say, a very cold individual. Alain Juppé was very hurt by this, according to his response, and he said that he has a lot of respect for Madame Chirac, so he's clearly rising above all of this melee. And soutien, so the Le Monde then today has been talking about how this is not necessarily Jacques Chirac's support for Juppé is being welcomed, but there's also a degree of irritation. In any case, just to show you how this is playing out in cartoons, because this is just a dream for political cartoonists, Francois. Chirac is taking his declarations back, or he's going back on what he said, i.e. his support for Juppé. And you can see here Bernadette Chirac perilously sort of close to a stairwell. In other words, that he might have to come back on his support for Juppé because she's threatening him.
He is near to the top of the stairs there.
That's right. Here he is asking for his lovely wife to get him a beer, and I think she's saying, ask Alain Juppé to get you a beer. Elsewhere we have, there's lots and lots. Plantu also, I suppose, pointing out the tensions between the former first couple. Chirac is voting for Juppé. You can see Bernadette there looking a little bit unimpressed by that. Also, a lot of quotes that have been pulled out here by the Nouvelle Observateur. Apparently, this is a quote from Bernadette Chirac saying that when he is unhappy with her, he gives her a little... he hits her with his cane. So in any case, it's painting a very odd picture of the domestic situation in the Chirac household. Also, TV5 Monde putting this particular cartoon up online, and here Chirac has famously had health problems over the years and over the last number of years, and issues with his memory, which helped out in certain court cases. And here his memory seems to be in flying form in this particular image, because
he's got his memory back.
That's right, because of course in supporting Alain Juppé, he is, you could say, sticking a knife in the back of his successor, Mr. Sarkozy, who is of course hoping for the presidency of the party. So there you go, lots of political cartoons.
A field day indeed. James Creedon, many thanks.
Thanks, Francois.
What else is on your menu today?
All right, well, we'll be looking also at Occupy Central, that hashtag which is still trending. And France has finished, a quote by a British retail executive, which a lot of people don't agree with, Francois. So we'll be taking a look at that controversy. All right, many thanks, James Creedon. I want to thank our panel, and thank you for joining us here for The World This Week.